What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. As promised, we have the continuation of our league winning series from last week, going over wide receivers today. The biggest league winners last season at the wide receiver position were Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Devonta Adams, Jamar Chase, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. These five had by far the best championship rate, both among teams that drafted them and then kept them on the roster, and then they had an insanely high championship rate among teams that acquired them mid-season. For most of these people, it's going to be through the trade market. Amon-Ra St. Brown, a lot of people got off for agency. So what do they all have in common? First, obviously, they shattered their ADP. These were the wide receivers 46, 88, 6, 74, and 198th selected. Yet they finished as the wide receivers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 21 across the whole season. But more importantly, the wide receivers 1, 3, 4, 9, and 5 from week 10 on. So not only did these wide receivers perform well across the entire season, beating their ADPs, but they all finished inside the top 10 from week 10 on. St. Brown would not have been a league winner last season had he been the wide receiver 21 over like the entire season, including the second half. You need to have a top 10 ceiling to win leagues. And if you're not going to be top 10 over the entire season, even being drafted late, you have to be top 10, top like 11, like right in that range. You have to be a really high-end producer in at least the second half of the season. So we need to keep that in mind when we're coming up with players on this list. It's not just about picking the wide receiver 70 and have him finish 40th. Yes, that shattered ADP, but you need someone to have an elite ceiling. So we're going to go over 5 players that I think can be league winners this season. But before we do that, quick shout out for the website. Please give yourself enough time to review all the information before your draft is happening. You can absolutely sign up a few hours before and still do perfectly fine. You gain instant access to the rankings. You're going to be fine. You're going to draft a great team, but you'll have more success if you sign up a few weeks before your draft, read through all the articles, play around with the different tools, practice using the draft rankings with a mock draft before your actual draft starts. So again, please sign up for All In now. Don't wait for the last second. thefantasyfootballadvice.com. And it's always listed on like the bottom of the screen right now, so you guys can see it there. So who's going to win leagues this season? The first name that comes to my mind is Justin Jefferson, especially given how I have now changed the rankings. If you guys see on the website, he is now the wide receiver 2 ahead of Jamar Chase. I did that breakdown, had Chase earlier in the summer ahead of him. We're moving Jefferson up to 2 now. And there's a realistic argument to having him 1 over Cooper Kupp. I will not be doing that, at least yet, but there's an argument to doing so. He's coming off the board at exactly the same spot that Adams was last year. Remember, Adams was one of the players I mentioned. Adams was a league winner last season, so he can absolutely do that. Even Adams not even being 1, he was the number 2 wide receiver, 6th player off the board. That's right where Justin Jefferson is going. And I know it's easy to say like, oh, he can have, a Kupp-like season this year, given that, their new head coach was the offensive coordinator for the Rams last season. But there's a reason it's easy. There's a reason that literally everyone is saying that, because O'Connell confirmed that he wants to shift Jefferson around the formation a lot, just like he was doing with Cooper Kupp. And then Jefferson himself has raved this offseason about how pass-heavy things are going to be, way different than we've seen before, the very run-heavy offense, how easy, this is probably the most important part, how easy a lot of the receptions are going to be for him to get. They're scheming him looks quickly, short routes, just get the ball into his hands. And I mean, obviously, if that's going to happen, he's going to have an insane upside. That was part of why I moved him up over Chase, was that I was looking into things and I was under projecting his catch rate. I think his catch rate's going to be really, really good this season because of how they're going to scheme him looks. And given how well he projects when he's got the ball in his hands, how many targets he's going to project for, touchdowns, he pretty easily now moves up ahead of Jamar Chase. Now, I said on the live stream this week that they are different wide receivers, talking about Kupp and Jefferson. Kupp is he's the best zone beater in the NFL, which is good because he faces zone like 70% of the time. He had a 91% success rate, not 91st percentile. He was in the 99th percentile for beating zones, but a 91% success rate. So 9 out of 10 times when he's going up against zone coverage last season, he's open. And that's typically happening across the middle of the field when you have a great quarterback like Matthew Stafford, a player of his skill level. It's no wonder he had a fantastic season, right? Those are just easy routes to get Kupp the ball, and they just hammered that over and over and over again. And the more I think about it, while no one should expect Jefferson to post Kupp-like numbers just because Kupp had like one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen, like expecting someone to do that is, a little bit of wishful thinking. So despite that, there's no reason to think that Jefferson can't come close. And realistically, he is a better wide receiver than Cooper Kupp. I think Adams is the best wide receiver in the NFL, but I think Justin Jefferson is probably the second best. Not only did he have a 91st percentile success rate versus man last season, but a 96th percentile success rate versus press, 94th percentile success rate versus man coverage. He runs every single route in the route tree at an elite rate. And like I said before, I'm not ready to move him over Cooper Kupp, but I wouldn't fault anyone who wanted to grab Jefferson first. There's a very good chance that he has a record-breaking season this year, and he would be my pick for the most likely wide receiver to win leagues. And again, for people who want to say you can't be a league winner in the first round, Adams was last year. And if Jefferson goes out there and he has 1,800 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns, it doesn't matter if you took him first overall, he's going to help you win the championship. And I really think that's well within his range of outcome this season. He's going to have an awesome year. The second most likely league winner in my eyes is Mike Evans. Godwin is coming off a torn ACL. Gronk is retired. Antonio Brown just lost his mind. So given that the Bucs are still going to be top 5 in pass attempts, they still have Tom Brady throwing the football, there's a clear path to a 20 touchdown season for Mike Evans. He's in no way going to challenge for the league lead in receptions, in receiving yards. That's not going to happen. That's just not the type of player Evans is. But he's going to be the focal point of the offense every time they get even remotely close to the end zone. And that's incredibly valuable. He has 13 and 14 receiving touchdowns in his first 2 seasons with Tampa Bay. And the crazy part is, if we look at last season, he wasn't even that featured in the red zone. He definitely wasn't as featured as everyone thinks that he was, because we all remember these 1-yard touchdowns. We remember all these plays where it's oh, they're in the red zone. Oh, obviously it's going to Evans, and then it does. But Brate and Godwin both out-targeted Evans inside the 20 last season. While Evans was used more inside the 10-yard line, he only received 20.7% of the team's targets in that area. So you're 20.7%, that's a relatively high number, right? Not that high. David Johnson, Braxton Berrios, Randall Cobb, Zach Pascal, Tim Patrick. All of those players were used at a higher rate inside the 10-yard line than Mike Evans. And yet he still scored 14 touchdowns. And again, I know he's not going to push for 110 receptions. I know he's not going to push for 1,600 receiving yards. And I know that touchdowns can be a little bit fluky. He could absolutely go out there and have 7 touchdowns this season. But what else are the Bucs going to do? I mean, they're still going to be an elite offense, throw it a ton, score a bunch of their touchdowns through the air, and they're going to score a ton of touchdowns no matter who Brady's throwing to. I have all the confidence in the world that Evans is going to have an elite season. And if we're trying to find league winners, someone capable of 20 touchdowns needs to be mentioned. After those two, we'll work our way into the middle rounds, where I would definitely list Darnell Mooney because I think he can have 150, 155 targets this season. And I mean, he could also increase efficiency. He could be used more deep downfield, all the reasons I talked about yesterday. And that's why he's not in today's videos. I literally talked about him yesterday. I don't want to do it 2 days in a row, but pretend Mooney's also in this video. I think he can absolutely be a league winner. So I'm looking around the middle rounds and I'm just trying to think about, who's most likely to have a top 10 season? And a name that pretty clearly jumps out to us is Michael Thomas. And I know I've been critical of him this season, and I think I may have included him in the most likely to bust in every round video. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I may have done that. But realistically, even though he's an obvious risk and he has a high chance of busting, if he doesn't bust, so if you take him in the middle rounds and he actually works out this season, you're getting a player who had 149 receptions just a few years ago. And I know that was with a different quarterback, a much better quarterback. I know that was when he had much less competition for targets. I love Olave. Landry's going to command targets. They have people to throw to. But if it works out, again, you're getting a player with that sort of ceiling, and that's not something you can say about many players going the mid-8th round as the 38th wide receiver off boards. The latest reports are that he's, could be back in camp by like early camp, I guess. He could be returning then. And to me, that reads as not going to open camp, but sometime in like early August, they're kind of expecting him back. And I bring that up because we always talk about players who could fluctuate a lot in ADP. I don't think that happens right away. And I think he might remain in this ADP come early August into mid-August. And that's really important because a lot of you are going to draft in that, part of the year. And if you're doing your draft and he still kind of isn't at camp and he's going in the 8th, sometimes slips into the 9th, maybe even 10th round, and you can grab a player with this level of upside, sure, again, it could not work out. He could just be fine. But you could say that about pretty much any player going in this range. And if he does work out, if we get reports that he's the number 1, that he's doing really well in camp, his ADP goes up to the 5th round. And if you can draft a player that a week later could be going multiple rounds earlier, that's really, really sharp thing to do. So we can absolutely bust, but the upside here is crazy. That's what we're looking for league winners. Another mid-round wide receiver that sticks out is DeAndre Hopkins. Since joining the league in 2013, he's been the wide receiver 65, 18, 5, 38, 2, 4, 5, 8, and 18 and half PPR points per game. And that 18 number last season is dragged down a little bit because of injury. He left one game early after getting hurt, and then he played through an injury for like 2 weeks before missing the final 4 games of the regular season and their playoff game. But in his 7 healthy games last season, he averaged 4.7 receptions, 60 receiving yards per game, and 1 touchdown per game, ranking as the wide receiver 10 overall. So if we're thinking about the later rounds, who could be a top 10 wide receiver or top 10 wide receiver in the second half of the season, how does Hopkins not fit that mold? He's been a top 10 wide receiver for 5 consecutive years. And if you're worried about injuries now that he's older and stuff like that, last year was the first year we actually had injury concerns. He's been remarkably healthy throughout his whole career. There's no reason to think he's all of a sudden going to break down. And he's going to miss the first 6 weeks of the season being suspended. But after that, if you're getting a low-end wide receiver 1 for the final 11 weeks of the season at a cost of a mid-7th round pick, now, again, maybe his play starts to decline. Maybe Marquise Brown commands more targets than Kirk. But he was still an elite wide receiver last season. He's still been remarkably healthy over his career. He's a great wide receiver on a great offense that's going to vastly outperform his ADP when he's playing. And if you think you can survive the first 6 weeks, especially if you're playing in a hometown league, you really think you can dominate the first couple rounds of your draft, you might not need this pick to start out for you right away. And so it sets up really nicely for effectively, it's not even a breakout, but a second half breakout, and one that we know is probably going to happen. It's a really, really, really good pick. As for a late round wide receiver, it's difficult finding someone that you really think has top 10 upside in the later rounds. So you're really focused on, who can do this in the second half of the season? Remember, Moner St. Brown was a league winner last season. He was a wide receiver 76 from weeks 1 through 9, and the wide receiver 5 from week 10 on, which is honestly crazy to think about. But, he was a league winner doing that. So you don't need this player to produce right at the beginning of the season. Now, technically any wide receiver could do this, but besides Hopkins, the most likely candidate is a rookie. They historically perform better in the second half of the season, oftentimes after their bye, a lot of post-bye breakouts. But if we're looking at a second, third year wide receiver, there's no reason to think that all of a sudden the second half of the year is when their breakout is. For rookies, there's a lot more variance because we just simply don't know how good these players are going to be. We have general ideas, we think we know, but there are breakouts all the time that we weren't expecting, like St. Brown last season. And so look to rookies. If you're looking in this range for a league winner, rookies are your best pick to do that. And when we're thinking about all of the late round rookie wide receivers, Christian Watson's the one that stands out to me. 1 billion vacated targets from Adams leaving, high draft capital being taken in the early second round, elite physical measurements, 98th percentile speed score, 95th percentile burst score, 97th percentile catch radius. Now, I honestly kind of do expect him to start slow, and there's a chance that people give up on him. And heck, there's a chance that he doesn't even truly break out this season. But Sammy Watkins and Randall Cobb-Dust, Lazard is fine, but he's Alan Lazard. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. Like, he just has a cap ceiling. He can only be so good. They have been talking up Amari Rodgers. He's been getting a little bit of hype, but I mean, he proved nothing last season when they really needed him. Romeo Doubs is super unathletic, has late fourth round draft capital, so can't really expect him to be the guy. Like, Watson has a chance to be incredibly valuable down the stretch this season, and his ADP has dipped to a reasonable point on Underdog, and he remains very, very cheap on ESPN, FFPC, NFL, and Yahoo. So those are 5 wide receivers that have league-winning ceilings this season. You can check out my exact rankings, and you can find other league winners at other positions, but also my exact projections, draft strategy articles, access to our private Discord, and a whole lot more at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow with the latest ADP changes of the last week, Sunday to go over some undervalued players and drafts, and then Monday for another episode of Mock Draft Monday. That, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, how about hitting the like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.